Hello, everyone. Welcome to another week of Mastering Dungeons. I am Sean Merwin, and I am here with the master of all the dungeons, Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos.
Woo! How are you doing, Sean? I am very happy to be here.
I am happy to be here too, rubbing two sticks together to make a podcast.
That's how we do it.
Yes, we do it old school.
Stone
Uh,
by stone, brick by brick. You may
that's
think computers are involved. Oh, no.
Oh no, we're using tin cans and string, baby.
That's
Tin
right.
cans and string.
I hear you loud and clear, neighbor.
Yeah. So 47 years ago, there was this game created called D&D. I think it has a good chance of lasting.
Yeah, it's got some sticky to it.
Yep. So somewhere around this time, 47 years ago, a small brown box set of the original D&D rules was released into the world. I've been perusing that book of Dice and Men,
Yeah.
and it's an interesting story of how things came to be and how how some things are going to succeed no matter how hard that the people making them try to fail.
Yeah. I like of Dyson Men, Mr. Ewalt, right.
Yeah.
That's a good book. He has a real knack for telling a story, and I like how he weaves in the history of the game and his own campaign together.
Yeah.
But primarily the history of the game. Yeah, it's fascinating read. Really good stuff.
Yep. So pamphlets.
Happy birthday.
Yep. Happy birthday, D&D. Next, the Unearthed Arcana Gothic Lineages article not only came out, but they are now taking feedback on it. So you can go give your feedback on the Damphir, the Hexblood, and the Reborn. And we're not going to go through those step by step because we're already doing that with Tasha's.
Yep.
But if you have feedback, make sure you give it. But we did want to note one of the sidebars in this article talks about the customization of racial traits that Tasha's introduced and how going into the future that race options in D&D are going to lack some of those rules mechanics like ability score increases, language traits, alignment traits, and so on. Anything that's based on culture is going to be excised from that portion of the game. The rules will still reflect physical or magical realities, but not cultural realities.
Yeah, it's pretty. I think this really created a lot of positive reactions on Twitter when people saw this file, because it does take everything a step further than what Tasha's did, and does acknowledge not just that, hey, you have this flexibility of how you create your character, but that we're actually going to change how we look at this term of race, and that separation of sort of true physical genetic things, right? Having dark vision, being short in stature, like that's a thing that a species has, and its mechanical components are things that we will use as race. But everything else, languages, ability scores, those are who you happen to be, and we're not going to typecast that way, which is interesting.
Yep. So that evolution of rules changes, based around these concepts is continuing as we see in this article. And I'm sure we'll continue further as more rules material is released for 5e.
Yeah.
And we have reached the puppet stage of D&D. I did notice this, and I sort of shook my head and chuckled and thought, yeah, why not? You want to talk about the puppet stage of D&D?
I mean, you have to, right? I mean, when you think of like how popular are we as a game, and then you realize, we truly have reached the puppet stage. So they announced via email, via Twitter, all the ways. D&D has a show that's on YouTube, put together by a different group. That is a 6-episode YouTube series called Stuff of Legends. Get it? Stuffing. And it's a YouTube series with puppets on a D&D adventure. There is a trailer out already. February 2nd is when the first episode released, and then I'm not sure how long it is for each episode to be released, what the spacing will be, but new releases will be coming out until you have a full 6-episode series of puppets.
Yep. Hey, it was time. Time to get time to get your puppet on.
I've been demanding a puppet show for so long.
And speaking of shows, minus the puppet, Winter Fantasy is happening this week. When this show drops, it will probably be the first day of Winter Fantasy. There will probably be a few seats still available when the show drops. So, we talked about it before. A great time. It's all online this year. I personally will miss not going to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and seeing all my friends. It's kind of got me a little down, but we're going to keep the faith. We're going to keep gaming, even if it is online. You'll be able to play all the games, and Jasper's Game Day will be supported as well with cool rerolls, helping to fund suicide prevention.
Yeah, and you can go to the jaspersgameday.com site, and you can not only buy your reroll tokens, which directly gives money, but you can also put in money for raffle tickets, which give you a chance of winning various cool prizes that role-playing companies have donated, or special certificates that the Adventurers League has put up that let you have cool things in game. So a great cause to support while you're enjoying your Winter Fantasy games. I'm signed up to play a couple of different games with my buddies that I usually travel to Origins or Gen Con with. So now we're doing the online Winter Fantasy. And it's great, but it also really does make me miss all the great friends that we see at Winter Fantasy. And so for those listening, we miss you. Can't wait to be able to do this safely in person.
Yes, for sure.
The day will come.
Mm-hmm.
A good 5 years from now, probably.
Yeah, well, hopefully not 5 years, but and, I mean, I'm sure people are out there going, "Oh boy, we don't get to see Teos and Shawn." Whew, we've dodged the bullet for another year. The D100 News takes a look at 2020 with their top 100 Kickstarters, and it looks at the most backed projects with at least 2,000 backers as indication of interest without looking at revenue per se. I was very happy to see that the new company I work for, Ghostfire Gaming, had number one with over 9,000 backers for Grim Hollow: The Player's Guide. That was the 7th biggest RPG project since Kickstarter launched in 2009.
Yeah, in terms of revenue, right, over 740,000 on that Kickstarter really shows the strength and this whole article is just sort of fascinating. I love looking at things like this because it's the kind of thing that, like, it's data, but you can't quite draw conclusions. But it's so captivating to look at it, right? You know, what does it mean? What does it tell us?
Yep.
One thing it obviously tells us.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
D&D dominates, right?
Yeah. So 7 of the top 10 were D&D projects, and more than half of those had over 2,000 backers.
Yeah.
Of those projects. 4 of them were standalone role-playing games, 2 being licensed properties, and all being science fiction, which was interesting. I was surprised by this next fact that no Pathfinder project in 2020 had more than 2,000 backers.
Yeah, except for there was one that was like a video game and wasn't actually role-playing. And that's a thing that's important to note here, is that they really tried to isolate things that were primarily a role-playing game. And this happens sometimes in surveys. And what it does do is it takes out some companies, like I think MCDM often doesn't qualify for this because they'll have like miniatures or other pieces. And so they'll get cut out of it, even though they'll have very big numbers. So I believe MCDM might not been on this list because of that, because it's seen as sort of being in conjunction with other things. So similarly for Pathfinder, the video game doesn't count, and all the other projects are very small and few in number, which is very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there were some strong indie games like Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which is an apocalypse world-based game that was 3rd on the list. And we have both new companies like Hit Point Press, Free League, Hunters Entertainment, as well as established companies like Kobold Press and Onyx Path. So that's under d100news.com. You can look at the RPGs on Kickstarter in 2020.
Very cool.
You want to talk about Jon Peterson?
Yeah, so Jon Peterson is a D&D historian. He posts on Twitter and has a blog, Playing at the World, as well as a book with that name. And he looked at the earliest uses of the term immersion. And I thought this was kind of fascinating because a lot of times we like to think about role playing and the level of role playing, as being something very unique to today or these days rather than older. And we think of people just chucking dice and murdering each other. But he looks at immersion showing up as a term as far back as 1977, but then also multiple mentions throughout the 70s of getting into character. In 1975, there's a piece that writes about living the part and other words like that. So terms that mean the same thing as immersion, but they sort of hadn't found a word for it. Even role playing doesn't appear as a term used often until later on. But he looks back at a Kriegspiel, a type of wargaming developed by the Prussian army in the 19th century. And here they're simulating combat, and so to do so, they believed it was better to approximate real command structures by getting into a role and playing out that role. And so even in wargaming, there was often this idea that, well, let's get into character somewhat, right? Even though we're not playing a character truly, we're sort of reporting for our units or whatever.
Right.
And he shows some really neat pieces that when you look at it, you're like, wow, that's actually quite modern in feel. So like B1, Search of the Unknown, classic adventure, says, take on your character's persona and immerse yourself in the game setting, enjoying the fantasy element and the interaction with your fellow players and the dungeon master. Which is, it could just be in an adventure today.
Right.
Or a really neat 1981 article by Ed Greenwood, the father of the Forgotten Realms. And the point of the article is he's saying you don't have to know all the rules, but he says that it's particularly not important to teach new players the rules if you tell them to play like their characters and do what their characters do. Because if they just tell you what their character would do, they don't need to know the mechanics of it. You can look that up or know it. They don't need to actually know the particular thing. And he actually mentions the Kriegspiel 1876 war games as using this sort of mentality. So I thought that was all really a fascinating look back at how immersion and role-playing have been around since pretty early on.
Yeah, and it's still obviously a conversation today as we talk about, not just D&D, but different games and how they meld the concept of role playing and narrative creation versus the rules that they used to do so. It's always a fascinating and relevant topic to discuss when you discuss D&D.
Yeah.
And speaking of D&D, let's talk Adventurers League. We are going to give you a brief rundown of where the D&D AL website went.
It vanished.
It is gone, but it is returned, sort of. You can get updates and be part of the community by going to the D&D WotC Discord. And they have moved some content to the WotC website, a more general description of what the Adventurers League is and what it does. And they are also going to move some of the content to the Yawning Portal, which is what they use now to sign up for the D&D weekends or some of the like D&D live events.
And this came up as a conversation on Twitter this week, and DM David was sort of saying like, I'm a big AL fan. I don't kind of understand how is AL communicating? And so there was a lot of discussion back and forth. And so I actually said, all right, I'm going to put together a blog on this, which I did, because it is a little confusing for people. And also Discord can be so hard to navigate. And while you and I mentioned on a show several episodes ago that you can subscribe to just that update channel and point that to a Discord channel, that's not a very obvious thing for how to do it.
Right.
So I on the blog, I put instructions so you can follow it. So you can make your own Discord channel and have it come in there. And that way you don't have to wade through all of the enormous number of channels on the Wizards of the Coast Discord channel to find the AL updates. You can just send it to one little channel that you put together. Or if you have like a Discord server that you have with your friends, your gaming group, then everything can feed there.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting to see that they are... that they have these sort of many ways of providing information that aren't always under one umbrella, right? Like Yawning Portal is a great name in terms of a place to go play adventures, but it's not obviously connected to AL. And so I think there'll be some work as they try to join that all together thematically.
Yeah, you and I have been doing this, living campaign, organized play, RPGA, whatever you want to call it, over the years. We've been doing it for a long time, and it's fun to watch this wheel go around. Of, we're going to communicate this way because it's very clear, and whether it's it was Yahoo groups, and then it was
right.
There's too many Yahoo groups, and they're too out of control, so we need to move it to the WotC website. But then when you get to the WotC website, it's impossible for even people that work for Wizards to update that in a timely manner. So then the wheel swings back around to these third-party channels, and it's just a constant motion, and it's not insidious. It's not, it's not people doing anything wrong. It's just the way the cycle works. And
I mean,
we'll always do it.
Right. We're people, we're fallible, and just like our own companies that are trying their best to get something done. How you distribute information is an endless pursuit, and it's very difficult. And so we'll see this wheel go around for sure.
Yep. And something else has come around, the Wheel of Eberron for Beetle and Grimm's. They are offering 20% off their gold edition Eberron box set during February. They call it Feberon. And so you can get that gold edition, Rising from the Last War, Beetle and Grimm's edition. Contains maps, and it essentially contains the whole book, divided into its own chapters, so you can hand out chapters to the players with the information they need, while you can keep the monsters and the mini adventure and all of that on your side of the screen.
Yeah, and it has gorgeous handouts that look like they're notes that you found, and they'll have super cool maps and a train map that you can play on, and an airship, and all kinds of neat things like that. So these are always great sets, and 20% off is good.
Yes. And it's not a full platinum edition, so it's you're not talking several $100s, just a couple $100. And so if you're an Eberron fan and you missed it the first time around, here's your chance to get in on it. Last but not least, I want to give a shout out for a Kickstarter that Ghostfire Game and Eldermancy are combining to do. It's called The Seeker's Guide to Twisted Taverns. It went live this morning as of our recording, and it had already funded $20,000 had already funded in, I think, like 30 minutes.
Wow.
So it is a very large project that deals with all sorts of mystical, magical taverns, and it will contain maps, not just maps, but modular maps, because these taverns, they don't look the same each time you go in. So there's modular pieces, and there's NPCs, and there's quests, and there's all sorts of goodies that go along with it. So you can give that a look on Kickstarter at Seeker's Guide to Twisted Taverns.
Yeah, that's awesome. It looks really cool. I love taverns and bringing them to life, so it's not a boring place that you're visiting. Cool to see.
Yep. And we should now talk about Tasha's, because we have some fighter martial archetypes to get through. We did talk last week about the optional features, and now we can talk about the new archetypes. The first of which is the Psi Warrior, a psionically infused striker and defender. Think Githyanki, think Eberron with the Kalishtar. You could try to think Dark Sun, although Dark Sun isn't mentioned in the...
I mean, it was like they're picking on me when they don't mention Dark
Sun. I know.
Really.
It's like a personal affront. I'm surprised they didn't put a little footnote in there like, screw you, Teos.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's what it is, actually. It's an invisible one. Only I can click on. No, or maybe Robert Aducci. I think it's because some of us have complained about whether the way psionics has been tackled in 5e truly works well for Dark Sun, and it's an open question that I think some will say it's fine, and some will say it doesn't really work. But it's the tack that 5e has taken, and so I think that's something one can think of when you're looking at these psionic, because there are a couple of psionic subclasses spread throughout Tasha's, and you can think, does this really work for 5e, or will it need some adjustment? 5e Dark Sun, will it need some adjustment when that setting is released?
Yeah, I mean, what Teos is talking about is it's been a constant war in gamer terms since first edition, since AD&D, where they introduced psionics, which is, how should it be a completely separate system? how should it work with the base rules? Should it even be in the game? All of those questions. And everyone has their own bent on how they want to see it handled. And there obviously opinion matters, but what's more important to me is, does it work in and of itself?
My most important thing, Shawn, is should there be a halo drawn over every psionic character's head, as in 4th edition?
Probably. I don't see why not.
Of course.
And those of us who played AD&D back in the days are still psychically scarred by psionics back then, because it was
a whole show on it.
Yeah, we could do several shows on it, but let's just say it wasn't well balanced.
No.
And so players that wanted to play with them tended to abuse them pretty horribly.
And psionic combat happened in the first segment of actual combat, which is to say the first millisecond. And so when we met Lolth at the end of Queen of the Demon Web Pits, the character who had psionic powers in our party was super excited, and literally the combat starts and they drop dead.
Yes.
Because they lost.
They lost the second combat with
psionic combat
with a goddess, and as it should be.
Took like 10 minutes of real game time to play out, but in game it was drops down to the ground dead.
Yep.
Combat begins.
Good times. So for the Psi Warrior, though, it's a little more reasonable. This warrior has psionic powers, and how are those psionic powers expressed? Through psionic energy dice. Okay.
Wow.
So we already have a prerequisite or a precursor to this, which is the martial dice that you use as a battle master. So all right, so that's the tack they're going to take,
which is cool, right? I like when D&D sort of takes another thing that's sort of familiar but is a little different, and so this is a way to psionics probably should feel a little different. And so let's take the battle master concept of these sort of dice that empower your abilities, but we'll call them psionic energy dice and make it a little different. Cool.
Yep. So that's what you use. How many do you get? You get a number of dice equal to twice your proficiency bonus. So at lower levels, you'll have 4, and then you'll increase as you go up to, was it 10? No, 12 at 17th level. So all the powers that are going to be talked about here are powered by those dice. What I found interesting was, even if you are just a 3rd level fighter and you take 17 levels of something else, you still get all of those dice, even though you're only a 3rd level character.
Because it's proficiency bonus.
And it doesn't say proficiency bonus just in fighter. Now, the die type also increases over levels. It starts as a D6, goes to a D8 at 5th, a D10 at 11th, and a D12 at 17th. And that does say based on
in
your
class.
In this class.
Yeah.
So you will get more dice whether you are a 3rd level fighter or a 20th level character, but your die type will not increase, which I thought was okay. I think that's a fine trade-off.
Yeah. So then these dice are going to empower your powers, right?
Yep. And you want to start talking about those powers?
Sure. We get 3 different powers that we have access to right off the bat that kind of set the core of what this class is about. The first one is Protective Field. When you or another creature you can see within 30 feet takes damage, use your reaction, you expend a psionic energy die, you roll the die, and the damage taken is reduced by whatever the result of the die was, minimum of 1, which is a sort of telekinetic force shield that you throw up. I noted that, there's a lot of interrupt reaction things in subclasses in Tasha's.
Yeah.
It's starting to feel a little bit like 4E did, where every character could respond to what a boss did, and you just go around with, well, I do this, I do that, the flow gets interrupted. Yeah. I mean, the game did not, the 5e core book does not require that everybody's always using the reaction each round, and it's getting a little bit more that this is going to happen more and more reactions.
Yep. One of the like every edition, something that someone likes as a positive as someone else's negative.
Mhm.
And for 4E, one of the complaints slash benefits was you have to pay attention during other people's turns.
Right.
You would always hear that. It was either I love 4E because everyone has to pay attention during everyone's turn, or I hate this game because I have to pay attention during everyone's turn.
Well, that was certainly something I liked, because I noticed coming from third to fourth that in third edition, you could go take a drink of water, or at convention games, someone would go to the bathroom. But now it's like you couldn't. You had to be there to apply your bonus to someone else's turn. And,
Right.
and all these things that could feed off of what other people did meant you had to pay attention, which did mean everybody was more engaged.
Right. Or everyone was missing everything.
Yeah.
Or it slowed the game down dramatically as someone had to remind you, hey, don't you have an ability? Yeah. So it's always that double-edged sword. And you're absolutely right. We're getting more into that territory where everything is becoming just a step more complicated, a step more interrupty.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely.
And there are players who do not love the super strategic play, right? They want to do more on the side of like, let's tell stories, let's roll dice, let's play casual. And the more and more that you have to pay attention to these type things, the less that kind of player is going to feel comfortable. So
Right.
it's just worth keeping in mind.
Right.
As a player, that's one of those things you can look at when you're choosing your subclass. Do you really want to manage those kinds of things? If you don't, don't take that kind of subclass. But if you do, then it's great, right?
Yep.
All right, so Protective Field is the first one. Psionic Strike is the second one. Once on each of your turns, you can propel your weapons with Psionic Force. Immediately after you hit a target within 30 feet of you with an attack and you have dealt damage to it with a weapon, you expend a Psionic Energy die, you roll it, and you deal force damage to the target equal to the number rolled plus your intelligence modifier. Mm-hmm. So, D6 plus int is a nice boost to damage. Mm-hmm. It can only be once per turn, so there's a little bit of a limit, and you have to use your dice, so that's limiting it. But it is a nice damage boost you can do several times per day. It's nice, right?
Oh, in addition, we should also mention that you get your dice back after you finish a long rest. Yeah. But as a bonus action, you can regain one expended psionic die, but you can't do that again until you finish a short or a long rest. Yeah. So basically, you can spend a bonus action to get a die back per encounter, if that's what you want to call.
If you take a short rest, you can then do that again. It's sort of an interesting. It's sort of interesting, right? Like you have to use your bonus action, which you're just going to do out of combat anyway. But
right, yeah, that's a whole other thing. Yeah. So that was Psionic Strike. Next is telekinetic movement. You can move an object or a creature with your mind as an action. You can target one loose object that is large or smaller, or one willing creature that I assume is large or smaller, but maybe not. I don't know. Other than yourself. If you can see the target and it is within 30 feet of you, you can move it up to 30 feet to an unoccupied square you can see. Alternatively, if it's a tiny object, you can move it to or from your own hand. Either way, you can move the target horizontally, vertically, or both. Once you take this action, you can't do it again until you finish a short or a long rest, unless you expend a psionic die to do it again. So awesome, as Teos notes, awesome tactical potential. And it's at least it's not a teleport, so I'm okay. I'm closer to liking this than a lot of the other teleporting things that we've seen at third level. And since it's willing, that I'm good with that. It's a free fly.
Yep. This is like the Jedi Clone Wars cartoon does this all the time. The Jedi will propel each other, across a chasm or something like that. I think it's pretty neat because of those confines. It also avoids the whole like let me put the bad guy in the fire or things like that, because it has to be willing. So it's a tactical positioning move, but it also works out of combat to get up onto the ledge or climb the pillar So I think it's neat.
Yep.
One thing is all these powers, or not all of them, but a number of them tap into your intelligence, especially that psionic strike that deals extra damage. So as a fighter, you now have to have both strength and int. And I almost wonder whether we shouldn't have just been an int class, which is if psionic Psionicist was a class as it was in 4th edition, as it has been in some other editions. We know that the primary ability would have been intelligence, and this would be the warrior psionicist, and it would use intelligence instead of strength. And so it's just like, well, you're forcing the secondary stat, which if you look at a fighter is needing maybe 2 stats with con. Now this is the tertiary stat, so that's a little harder, but
yeah.
So it goes.
And what my mind goes to now is, okay, I'm going to need int, so why not multi-class with wizard? Then I can do like booming blade sorts of spells to get that extra oomph, and then I get to add that. So it's it's an interesting thought on that whole intelligence thing.
Yeah, I would have rather it be an int class,
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah, me too.
as a class.
Yeah.
But this is the tack that they've taken.
Yeah.
It would also work better for Dark Sun if it was a Psionicist, but okay.
Who cares about Dark Sun? 7th level, you get Telekinetic Adept. So you get 2 more powers that you can use with your psionic die. The first is Psi-Powered Leap. As a bonus action, you can propel your body with your mind. You gain a fly speed equal to twice your walking speed until the end of the current turn. Once you take this bonus action, you can't again until you finish a short or a long rest, unless you expend a psionic energy die to take it again. So now you're not moving someone else around, you're moving yourself around. And that's cool. 7th level, sure. Fly away.
Yeah, it's fine. It's sort of funny that you can throw people through the air before you can throw yourself, but it's okay.
Well, I mean, I know that I have a hard time throwing myself through the air, but I can just heave other people around at will.
I didn't know you were talking publicly about that.
Yeah, well, and then Telekinetic Thrust is the second 7th level ability. When you deal damage to your target with your psionic strike, you can force the target to make a strength saving throw against your DC. If the save fails, you can knock the target prone or move it up to 10 feet in any direction horizontally.
This is another sign of that, right? It's a strength saving throw, so we can't dump our strength. But the DC is based on our intelligence modifier.
Yeah, well, it's
the target
the strength saving
throw. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So this is basically making strength a dump stat for fighters now.
Well, except that's what you're using to hit, right?
Unless you use dex weapons.
That's true. So you could do either dex, but you still have to have either dex or strength.
Plus, yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I'm going to talk about strength as a dump stat later when we talk about the adventure.
Wonderful.
So I'm queuing it up here for you.
Perfect.
At level 10, you get Guarded Mind. You have resistance to psychic damage. Moreover, if you start your turn charmed or frightened, you can expend a psionic energy die and end every effect on yourself, subjugating you to those conditions.
It's interesting that you end the effect, not the condition. So in theory, if some spell both charmed and poisoned you, I think all of it's gone because you ended the effect.
That's right. Yes, you end you end every effect on yourself. So what this means is sometimes it will say target is restrained. While you're restrained, you're also charmed, or while you're poisoned, you're also unconscious. They put 2 together. So what this does is if it's X that leads to Y charmed or Y frightened, it's the X that goes away, not the Y, which is obviously more powerful.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
You want to talk about level 15?
Bulwark of Force. As a bonus action, you can choose creatures, which can include you, that you can see within 30 feet, up to a number equal to your int. And each of those is protected by half cover for 1 minute or until you're incapacitated. So some number of party members are going to get +2 bonus to AC and Dex saving throws, because that's what cover does. And then once you take this bonus action, you can't do so until you finish a long rest, or you can expend a psionic energy die to be able to do it again later. Mm-hmm. Not bad. I don't know that it feels like level 15 to me.
Right.
But, okay.
Yeah. At level 18, you have Telekinetic Master. Your ability to move creatures and object with your mind is matched by few, except me. You can cast the telekinesis spell requiring no components, and your spellcasting ability for the spell is intelligence. On each of your turns while you're concentrating on the spell, including the turn in which you cast it, you can make 1 attack with your weapon as a bonus action. And once you cast the spell, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest or expend a die. And so, hey, being able to cast telekinesis at will for a bit, that's nothing to sneeze at when you can also take a regular weapon attack with it.
I think that's what makes it really work, because you could argue, well, my attacks are better than telekinesis, but when you get to do a little bit of each, now it becomes pretty cool. And now I'm thinking, like, I mean, let's be honest, this is the Jedi Knight subclass. Like, this isn't even just Psy Warrior. This is truly like a Clone Wars Jedi Knight. Yeah,
you're just whipping people around with one hand and hitting them with your lightsaber with the other.
Yep.
All right, so that was the Psy Warrior. Any thoughts on overall thoughts?
It's fun. It's cool. Again, I would have wished this was a Psionicist class and this is its fighter subclass, but I like the general what it provides as a package. Certainly thematic.
Yep. And I agree. Part of me loves that they're using the same sort of system that they use for the Battle Master with the dice. Part of me thinks that is as complicated as I want the game to be. So adding another piece that is equally complicated, as we've already talked about, can be detrimental to certain types of play styles.
And I think, we've already seen that 5th edition has this. Like, the Warlock is a far more complicated class, not just even subclass, but class than a fighter. And maybe unnecessarily so if you look at it from a design standpoint. You have like things like tons and tons of spells, but you only have a couple slots.
Right.
That kind of burden is great for some people. It means thinking and choosing and analyzing the game and very tactical kind of mindset. And for others, it's just it's baggage. And so I think the game always has to dance between those and make sure that there are enough ways to be effective, and that being effective doesn't require having this sort of management, right? That the stronger classes have this. So that's the part that I think is just design-wise, they need to look at carefully as they add more, and to make sure that the classes they're adding aren't primarily these kind of high engagement classes that require a certain mindset, because they don't appeal to everybody. So.
Right. Yep. And so let's talk about the other subclass, the Rune Knight. Now this I remember being out in an Unearthed Arcana, because I remember discussing it.
The funny part is I remember the other one more than Rune Knight, the Psy Warrior, but it's Dark Sun.
Yep. So at 3rd level, as a Rune Knight, you get bonus proficiencies with Smith tools, and you get to speak, write, and read Giant, because this is all about using giant magic to make yourself stronger, faster, more powerful. At level 3, you also...
Which, Sean, can we just pause and say, hey, this would have been a great subclass back when Storm King's Thunder was out, right?
Well, I think that might be when they originally released this.
That's probably true.
And so it's been a while. So at level 3, you get your main ability, which is called Rune Carver. You learn 2 runes, and each time you level in the class, you can replace one of the runes with a different one. When you reach certain levels, you gain additional runes. So you get 2 to start with. At 7th, you get 3 runes, 10th, 4 runes, and at 15th, you get 5 runes. So whenever you finish a long rest, you can touch a number of objects equal to the number of runes you know and inscribe a different rune onto each of these objects. The rune must be a weapon, a suit of armor, a shield, a piece of jewelry, or something you can wear or hold in your hand. The rune remains on an object until you finish another long rest, and an object can only bear 1 rune at a time. And some runes require you be a particular class level, and then if there's any saving throws, it's a con modifier plus 8 plus proficiency bonus. So you want to touch on the first rune here? We'll alternate.
And again, the point of these is you're taking an object and you're empowering it at the beginning of the day. So you have to sort of make this choice up front, but you get a number of different runes to choose from. Cloud rune, deceptive magic used by some cloud giants. While wearing or carrying an object with this rune, you have advantage on dexterity sleight of hand checks and charisma deception checks. In addition, when you or a creature you can see within 30 feet of you is hit by an attack roll, you can use your reaction to invoke the rune and choose a different creature within 30 feet of you other than the attacker. The chosen creature becomes the target of the attack using the same roll. So you redirect an attack from one creature to another by using the power. And once you invoke the rune, you can't do it again. Also worth noticing that you can redirect this attack regardless of the attack's range. This can be hugely, hugely powerful, right? Redirecting a big hit from your buddy to an enemy.
Yep.
That's pluses and minuses in two columns that are, it's like healing your character and dealing damage to another one. So super powerful. And all of these runes, you use it once and you can't do it again until you finish a short or long rest, which actually, short rest is pretty powerful too.
Yeah.
But my understanding is you still then get this baseline advantage, right? I think you're still getting the dexterity sleight of hand check and charisma deception checks. You just can't do the whole redirect again.
Yep.
So that's Cloud Rune. Fire Rune, similar mechanics in how it's going on, but while wearing or carrying an object with this rune, your proficiency bonus is doubled for any ability check that uses your proficiency with a tool. But now here's the juice. Yeah. When you hit a creature with an attack using a weapon, you can invoke the rune, summon fiery shackles. Target takes 2d6 fire damage extra. Must succeed on a strength saving throw or be restrained for 1 minute. And while restrained for that minute, it takes 2d6 fire damage at the start of each of its turns. What?
Yeah. So you're automatically you're doing at least 4d6.
Yeah. And then it does get a save right at the end of each of its turns, but wow.
Right. So I was thinking, it does 2d6 fire damage. That's cool. That's good. And I was like, wait, and what? And restrained, and 1 minute, and 2d6 damage at the start of each of its turns before it can even make it save to try to
because while restrained, disadvantage on its attack. So whew.
Yeah. So that's strong. That's strong.
Frost Rune. Yeah. Did you want to do Frost Rune?
I'll do Frost Rune. This rune's magic evokes the might of those who survive in the wintry wilderness, such as frost giants. So while you're wearing or carrying an object inscribed, you have advantage on wisdom, animal handling, and charisma intimidation checks. But here's the good stuff. In addition, you can invoke the rune as a bonus action to increase your sturdiness. For 10 minutes, you gain a +2 bonus to all ability checks and saving throws that use strength or constitution. Once you invoke this rune, you can't do so again until you finish a short or long rest. It's interesting. You note that it's not advantage, but a small bonus. But when you know that you need it is when you can use it the most. So we have to make this saving throw against poison. I know that I need it, so here goes, boom, Constitution. We're
doing a bunch of climbs up a mountain or something like that, and then 10 minutes worth, you're going to get this bonus. I still think this is like we haven't gone through all the runes yet, but let me just say that you have to make this decision at the beginning of the day. So that's the tough part, right? That the Frost Rune is only applicable if you're going to have this 10-minute zone of a bunch of checks.
Yeah.
And do you know that at the beginning of the day? Probably not. So you probably never use Frost Rune.
Right. Although you do get more. So by 10th level, you get 4. So
true.
True. You don't have, if you have a stone rune, you have a stone rune. You can't put it on something twice. Right. And so it's just there. And speaking of stone rune, this rune's magic channels the judiciousness associated with stone giants. While you have this rune on you, you have advantage on insight checks and dark vision to a range of 120 feet. In addition, when a creature you can see ends its turn within 30 feet of you, use your reaction to invoke the rune and force the creature to make a wisdom saving throw. Unless the save succeeds, the creature is charmed by you for 1 minute. While charmed, it has a speed of 0 and is incapacitated, descending into a dreamy stupor. The creature repeats the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending on a success. Once you invoke this rune, you can't do so until you finish a short or a long rest. Notice it doesn't say if you damage the creature, it comes out of its stupor. And now this is at 3rd level. You can do this. So you can incapacitate something and then just wail the bejeebers out of it.
Yeah, I don't know about this one. I mean, they managed to combine yet again in this book the darkness devil sight party
Right.
of like, let's find a way that everybody can, see in the dark, and a save or suck for monsters. I mean, wow,
Yeah.
that's beautiful.
Yeah. If you don't save, you just get creamed.
Obliterated. I mean,
Yep.
incapacitated. I mean, you do get to repeat the saving throw, but it's just a round of not doing anything when
Yeah.
you're an important creature. Oh, good night.
Yep.
Mm.
Now, those were all the ones that you can take at 3rd level. Now we're getting to the ones that are a little higher level. At 7th level, you get the Hill Rune. The magic bestows resilience reminiscent of a hill giant. While carrying an object that bears this rune, you have advantage on saving throws against being poisoned and resistance to poison damage. In addition, as a bonus action, you can invoke the rune to gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage for 1 minute. And then once you invoke it, you need to finish a short or a long rest. That's good. That's
Yeah, I like it.
That's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the Storm Rune.
Storm Rune. You must be 7th level or higher. Using this rune, you can glimpse the future the way a storm giant seer would. While wearing or carrying an object with this rune, you have advantage on intelligence arcana, and you can't be surprised as long as you aren't incapacitated. In addition, you can invoke the rune as a bonus action to enter a prophetic state for 1 minute or until you're incapacitated. Until this state ends, when you or another creature you can see within 60 makes an attack roll, saving throw, or an ability check, you can use your reaction to cause the roll to have advantage or disadvantage. Once you invoke it, you can't do so again until you finish a short or long rest.
Yep. So, yeah, those are all good things. Some of them are stronger than others. Some of them are way too strong, but there they are. And so, if you run a game where you get a lot of short rests, you can just be completely refreshing these each time and even more powerful.
Well, and what's great is the next feature, level 3 Giant Smite, at which point I said, whoa, we're still on 3rd level?
Yeah, so all the things that we've already talked about are 3rd level, and this is 3rd level as well. So go ahead.
As a bonus action, gain the following benefits which last for 1 minute. You can use this a number of times, equals your proficiency bonus, regaining it at a long rest. So all these last 1 minute. If you're smaller than large, you become large, along with everything you are wearing. If you lack the room to become large, your side doesn't change. But you can be a small halfling and go straight to large halfling. You have advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws.
Mm-hmm.
And once on each of your turns, one of your attacks with a weapon or an unarmed strike can deal an extra d6 damage to a target on a hit.
Okay, so that's still at 3rd level. We're still doing this for a minute. So you can combine that with the rune stuff that you can do.
Yeah, and to balance it, there are no more features beyond this level. I'm kidding.
No, yeah. How about at 7th level you get Runic Shield, where you can invoke your rune magic to protect your allies. When a creature you can see within 60 feet of you is hit by an attack roll, you can use your reaction to force the attacker to re-roll the d20 and use the new roll. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, and you regain them at the end of a long rest. So now you have a completely different reaction that interrupts someone's attack and does something. So it's just now you have to keep track of, did I use this rune? Did I use this rune? Did I use this rune? Have I become large? No. How many times? Oh, I have this runic shield. How many times have I used it? So you're keeping track of many different levels of thing here that you can do a certain number of times per day.
Yeah, and like if you have the storm rune on, for example, then for a minute you're in this prophetic state and you have to watch your reactions to give advantage or disadvantage out each turn. But then if you also are level 7, then you have this runic shield. So it's endless reactions for this class. So if you like to hog the limelight, you want the spotlight in your game and want it to be all about you, take the Rune Knight and dominate play.
And don't forget, you can still do the things that any regular fighter can do.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I was thinking that because a lot of times a class has to sort of do a trade-off.
Right.
Like we'll see it with the Psionic Rogue. Like you have to sort of not be doing what you might otherwise do so that you can do the thing this way. But this is just, it's all gravy, I think.
Yep. definitely a reason to play a fighter. If you thought fighters were underpowered, we're getting to the point where they are catching up to high level wizards. At level 10, you have great stature. The magic of your runes permanently alters you. When you gain this feature, roll 3d4. You grow a number of inches equal to the roll. And the extra damage that you deal with Giant's Might increases to a d8. Okay.
I think that's kind of fun that you're just permanently bigger. Like, that's kind of hilarious.
Right. And of course, I would roll, on 3d4, I would roll a 3. Right. So I would still be less than average height.
I think, yeah, that'd be hilarious. And then level 15, because it keeps going, Master of Runes. You can invoke each rune you know from your rune cover feature twice rather than once. You regain all expended uses when you finish a short or long rest. So this is interesting because you still know 5 runes, and you can apply the 5. So it doesn't change that. But what it is that you can trigger them twice.
Yep. So now you have to keep track of not just what you use, but how many times you've used each.
So that storm rune that puts you in the prophetic state, you can now do that twice before you hit a short rest. Hit a short rest, you can do it again. So I mean, it is very powerful. Like, you'll be doing a lot of things with this class, maybe too many things.
Yep. And at level 18, yes, there's more. You get Runic Juggernaut. You learn how to amplify your rune power transformation. As a result, when you deal extra damage with the Giant's Might feat, you can increase it to a D10. And moreover, when you use that feature, you can increase your size to huge rather than large. And your reach increases by 5 feet when you are that size.
You don't have to reach the huge size, but but according to the wording, if you do, that's when you get the reach. So you'll want to, but now you've got this huge creature clogging up the battlefield, and I don't love that in most rooms, especially those Rime of the Frostmaiden rooms we've been looking at. There are these little tiny rooms. Make that halfling huge, and that's an issue.
Yeah. And then you get, polearm masters who already have, a reach weapon plus extra reach, another 5 feet of reach. It's interesting. I could definitely see it being way too much for a lot of players and way too much for a lot of DMs to have to deal with.
One of the aspects of this is that you often would give your rune to a certain other character. So you'd put it on their weapon or on their shield or whatever, but they don't know the class like you do. So you're probably sort of reminding another player, oh, don't forget, you've got the blah rune. So you could, choose to expend that now. And that kind of stuff can get in the way of the game a bit. Depending on everybody's style. But
I never even thought of putting a rune on someone else's.
Yeah, because just an object. So, like an easy example is the fire one, and you could just say, hey, whenever you want to, you can, restrain that target and deal a bunch of fire damage to them. But you might still need to remind them. But if you put like the storm rune on someone else's shield, who's, like a super tanky person, or I don't know, you want to protect somebody by putting the hill rune on them to resist, but you got to remind them of it. And so there's this sort of layer management that's way beyond. You don't forget you have my bardic inspiration die, right? Right. And you're managing 5 of them, maybe twice per short rest. That's a lot.
It is a lot. So I mean, it's a lot. I think we can sum up this one with. Some people are going to have a ball with it because it's super tactical and there's a lot to keep track of, and some people love that. Otherwise, be wary of it, either as a player or as a DM, because it's going to be very involved. The final part of the fighters section of Tasha's is Battlemaster builds. And basically what it does is it gives you recommendations on how to build a Battlemaster to achieve a particular theme. So they go through archery, bodyguard, brawler, etc., telling you what feats to use, how to build that in a way to get that overall feel and get the most out of it. It's sort of like a mini character optimization for you.
I like that it was they talk about the fighting style choice you make, the maneuvers you choose, and feats, which is further than I thought they were going to go. I thought they might just say like, go take these maneuvers, but they really do look at how you would build your character a fair bit, which is kind of neat, right? Like I like that I think that's time well spent in a book to say, hey, you can take all the rules that already exist. Here's how you can make a concept work, and that's neat.
And this is the kind of character optimization I like, because it just makes you good at what the game expects you to be good at. It doesn't try to go beyond and break anything. It
Right.
just it says here is a way to be a competent character for what the game intends you to be.
Yeah, you're a pugilist, right? You
Yeah,
want to fight with your fist. Here's what's going on. You're an outrider. You're a
yeah,
skirmisher.
yeah.
A lancer. That's neat. And a lot of them are sort of historically looking, at things. And so I like that. I like this section a lot.
Yep.
Woo,
So
lighter.
we've gone for an hour, and we have not even gotten to Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden yet. Uh, what do you want to say about this map and this huge dungeon that we are?
Yeah. So we're gonna talk a little about Icewind Dale.
Yeah,
Spoiler time.
yep. Spoiler time. We're gonna touch on this pretty briefly. We don't want to go
Yeah.
too far, but yeah.
So the map is kind of cool. I've pulled it up here to look at it. It's actually really beautiful. It is roughly divided into 4 zones. And the book sort of divides things like rooms 1 to 10, 11 to 21, though those rooms aren't always in one of those 4 zones, which is kind of funny. Sometimes you're one of those numberings that they break it into is in another section. And the caves are sometimes joined just by a normal connector, but a lot of times it's a Rimmerhaz tunnel that slides you into one or a set of steps, which makes it very interesting. For being somewhat like a filler location, this is how to get from point A to B. It is really well done, and has some really evocative scenes. What do you think?
I think what I worry about with the dungeon when I'm a DM is how complicated is it? How many moving parts are there that I need to keep track of? And we already talked about the one moving part, which was Tequila Lee.
Yeah.
And so the rest of this is just sort of neat locations that don't have a bearing on the overall story other than a little bit of history of the city that crashed here. And those are handled pretty well right in the room description, so you don't need to keep this overall track of what the characters know or don't know. Just give them what's there.
And what they can get by going through this experience is a fair amount of horror pieces. Like you get this horror feel in various scenarios, whether it's because of the Netherese that died when the city crashed and pieces of it are found here, or because it's, I don't know, an infusion from the Far Realm or some other aspect like that. So you get a nice horror piece here. This is one of the places in the adventure which is done the best. Mm-hmm. You also get a really nice sense of that Netherese history, which I like a lot.
Yeah. I'm just going to mention a couple of rooms that I think you should, as the DM, be aware of. One, there are ice mephits flying around the ceiling, and they look like icicles. And what they do is they drop icicles on the PCs. And this is a way to take a very low CR monster that's really no threat to the party and make it fun, make it cool, make it different. It's not just we have to these ice mephits come charging at us and we beat them down. They're hovering around the ceiling. So it's going to challenge the characters to be able to pick them off because they're more dangerous dropping icicles than they would be if they were down in their face. And do fun things like, there's 7 ice mephits. I'm going to cast a fireball up at the ceiling just to take care of them all. Well, if you do that, just rain icicles down on them because they just basically, it's that sort of thing that's fun. Make the characters think things through, think their situation through, because I see players throwing fireballs all around, not even thinking, what are they actually hitting with this fireball? Right. Yeah. The side of the barn you're hitting. Guess what happens? The barn catches on fire. This is one of those things where you can reinforce that actions have consequences.
Something that I liked is how they use the remoras in this area. It's not just to join rooms together, but they have heated pools that gives you sort of feeling of ecology. There are remoras eggs in various places, which I think they missed a bit of an opportunity here to give it a random chance when a remoras might be born out of the egg, because you're going to be doing adventuring for a while, and I would certainly have some hilarious scene where the remoras is starting to hatch and you've got to keep it warmer so that it doesn't hatch. I think would be great. that could be neat. But there's some nice encounters, and there's one place where it makes you feel like there's a bunch of this might happen, but then it doesn't. And so I like how they have a couple of different Remorhaz pools encounters here. And I love the Remorhaz as a creature because it's this kind of thing that even when I roll poorly, when people hit me, they take damage. That's a win.
Yep. There is a room with 12 shadows. Now, 12 shadows, 12 shadows aren't really much of a fight for higher level characters, except for the fact that shadows do damage to your strength. They reduce your strength. So if you're not careful, people are dumping strength as a stat because it's really the least useful unless you're using a melee weapon that draws for strength. So you're going to be running around with a lot of strength 8 characters who, if they're hit by 2 shadows, they basically have 8 hit points. And you don't go to 0 strength and then start making death saves. You just die.
You become a shadow, yeah.
At 0 strength. And what happens? See, this is interesting because people are like, oh, there's so many spells that can just revivify. If you're dead and you are brought back with revivify, what's your strength? It's still 0. You're still dead. Right? I believe that's the case. So you have to be very...
you need a greater restoration, right?
To have your strength be higher than that. So, and also think about what happens if a shadow crits. Because you're going to be tempted as the DM to roll 2d4 instead of 1d4, but a critical only... doubles damage dice, and this is not a damage die because it doesn't say you do damage to strength. It says strength is lowered. So as fun as it may be to want to do, don't double the strength damage because it's not damage, the strength lowering ability of the shadow.
Yeah, shadows are no joke when they pick on someone, and because you have 12, that's the thing that, depending on the situation, this is something to watch in these kinds of encounters. Because of the situation, you might have like, oh, the rogue is going to go in ahead of everybody else, which is a horrible thing to do in a room full of shadows that can see in the dark, and and so they'll just gang up on that one character.
Right.
That can be really bad. Or if there's just a couple in the front line. So you want to draw the whole group in and then attack them with these shadows so that it's not overwhelming one character.
Right. And if you really want to do some damage with them, you can, but you just might want to be careful if you are being a cautious DM.
It's also worth saying that I love the way they tell a story here. So like you meet these shadows, and then that's in one room, you go into another room and you find the dead headless skeletons that became those shadows, and their story around becoming cannibals, but still eventually died of hunger. And then there's a psychic trauma in this area. And that then can kind of relay their story as you're going through sort of this situation here where you get super hungry and want to eat. Though it's kind of brutal, this one here. When you enter this area, you have to make see, how does it work? Let's see.
It's a saving throw, right? Constitution, maybe.
You make any creature that enters this room feels intensely hungry even after leaving the cave. That part's not a saving throw. Eating a handful of food keeps the creature's hunger at bay for 1 hour. If your hunger is not satisfied within 1 minute, so this is sort of a lingering thing, then you must make a saving throw or gain a level of exhaustion. And you must repeat this every hour until you succeed or die, or the effect is ended on the creature by magic that can remove a curse. Mm-hmm. So if you have some bad rolls and don't have remove curse or something like that, you're going to be in for some trouble. Yeah.
And there's a lot of great imaginative things in here. And then there's some things that make you go, what did I just read? And I'm looking at Vladimir's Spark. So it is a weapon that has obtained the soul of its wielder who died. And so if someone picks it up, a barbarian, fighter, monk, or ranger touches this weapon, this spark, this soul from the frost giant that wielded it goes into them, and they become 21 feet tall and get a strength of 23. Now, you have to understand that the ceilings in this place are not 21 feet tall. They are smaller than that. And so it becomes problematic at times. Do you really want something with a 23 strength?
Yeah, why? Why did we
Yeah.
do this? I don't know. Yeah, this part I just couldn't even understand it.
So you, depending on how your party is built, you may want to play with that. It's a cool concept. I love the idea. I just think you might want to temper it, have it only last for a minute, or do something else that
Yeah,
makes it reasonable.
you know what I would do is I would have this be that you have this spirit inside of you. And I would dig into that horror piece, and it's kind of talking to you in a way that you're not going to want to trust it. So you want to make the player kind of scared about it. And it would offer you this bargain of like having this great strength.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have to roll some number of dice, and that's the number of hit dice you lose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it would last for a short time. You'd get this, you'd embiggen yourself and you'd have this super strength. And then it would go away and it would say, come on, let's do it again. Right? Roll the dice. See if you run out of hit dice. And if you run out of hit dice, you're dead.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that'd be the fun way to do it, I think.
Yep. And
something like that, but a little, that's not just so automatic. Get this boon that,
that's why it's great to be the DM, because you can do these things. You can use this great idea and make it perfect for your game. The last one was The Thing in the Ice, which is basically a version of The Thing. There's this tentacled, horrible creature that's way deep in this ice, and it tries to dominate the characters. And it can dominate all of them if they fail their saving throws, and do whatever it wants with them, including attack each other. And this could then turn into a bloodbath of dominated characters beating on each other.
Or even if you stand still, if you roll just somehow like you roll terribly and everybody fails, then you're just going to stand there while it probes your mind, and you're going to take 44 psychic damage or half after being there for an hour, and then you might be forced into being dominated. And
so it just, again, you can have fun with it. It has the potential to be way overwhelming and not fun. So use it with best discretion for your group.
Yeah, and that's the kind of room where I would do exactly that. I might run it as it is and then tweak as I go, right? Mm-hmm. Just play around with it and change it up and create, because what can happen here is a really neat role-playing scene where one person's sort of taken over, and it could be fun to pull the player in another room, give them some instructions, and why are you just standing there, and then just like say like weird eldritch things,
right?
The sleeper has awakened, like a player at your table says that to you, you're like, oh my god, what's going on? And that could be really fun, right? And just so work with it and massage it.
So I
like the mimic cube.
Yeah. Yep.
This cavern that has an 8-foot cube of grayish green stone, and it's a spitting mimic, which is a version in this book that's CR5. It can spit acid at a creature within 30. And what's great about it, and I love this about mimics in general, is if you touch it, you adhere to it. So it's probably going to start with one or more characters stuck to this block that then reveals itself. And that's just great.
Yeah. If you want to really mess with them, put buttons on it. Yeah. Oh, there's a block with a lever and 2 buttons. And so everyone's going to go over and press the buttons and pull the lever and automatically stick to the creature. So,
God. Yeah. If you had the levers on one on each side and people think, well, we got to each grab one. Yeah. So depending on how hard you have to be on your characters, your players, you can adjust it.
Yep. Mess with them.
I do like the design wise that they, sometimes when you design a place like this, it's just like a bunch of open caverns. There's no story to it. There's no reason why you really would have treasure, because they haven't been in the outside world. And so by explaining that this has these chunks of pieces from the Netherese city that crashed here, now you have reasons why there's treasure. You have reasons why there's story and lore. You have reasons why there are undead that can sort of tell their tale. I love the design of this. I thought it was really well done.
Me too. I think it is for what is essentially filler. Like you say, moving from point A to point B, it can be made to work. It works on its own very well, and it is open for DM improvement to get the most out of it based on the story that you and your players are telling.
Just really quickly, Sean, one thing that's worth noting is that in H37, there are some Nothics.
Mm-hmm.
That the idea is they've come up following some drow that you can find in here who just happened upon these caves digging up from below. And the Nothics are sort of curious, watching things, figuring things out, which is not what I thought Nothics would do.
Mm-hmm.
And they prefer not to fight and stay back. And you can actually negotiate with them if you speak Loros, or if you can write to them in Draconic. Loros is what Professor Scant speaks, so the Professor Orb can translate. And they can actually provide information in the city, which I don't see a party negotiating with Nothics, but you never know. If they do, they get some really, really useful information.
Right.
None of which a DM will understand at this point unless they've read the next chapter, but super useful information for the party.
Yep. And, my overall thought on this was, so far what's been lacking in this adventure is a big dungeon. So this might be where you switch gears and go from, you're getting a long rest after every little thing you do, to now is the time where you're going to do a resource management, slower dungeon crawl, and kind of get the most out. Use that horror element. Have the enemies moving. The enemies in here, the wraiths. There's a wraith, the shadows, the vampire spawn, and Tequila Lee can all move around. So it's hit and run. It's drag things out. It's use that horror. It's keep them guessing. Slow things down.
Yeah. So at the end of this, you have a mile-long tunnel that leads out of these caverns to the city of Yithrin, where we're going to get into the Fallen City. We also get a note in the wrapping up section that finally tells us what Avarice is up to. We alluded to this in our last episode, but Avarice is following the characters. Mm-hmm. And by the time you make it out of this tunnel towards the city of Yithrin, Avarice and her followers arrive at the caves, and they kill any Elk Tribe warriors that were guarding the entrance, sort of nullifying whatever decision you made back then, which is a little bit too bad. But she's, chasing you and I guess catching up. The characters won't know this, but the DM is at least told that, okay, that's what's going on. And if somehow Tekeli was not slain, which is possible, because it doesn't really say that it doesn't continue using its tactics of running away. It at no point says stands and delivers and dies. Mm-hmm. So if you don't manage to slay it, it will escape and go to 10 towns to feed, which is very interesting. So that could be a thing that you come back to later when you return.
Right. I would totally use that. Right. That whole idea of a recurring enemy, I think is important. So, yep. So with that, next time we will delve into the next chapter, which is the Lost City, the whole reason that you've come here in the first place. So thank you, listeners, and thank you, patrons. If you would like to become a patron of the show, you can go to patreon.com/MMP. Teos, you, social media, where, why, how?
I can be found on the Twitters at AlphaStream, and I can maintain a blog at alphastream.org where I can tell you all about your Discords and your Adventurers League and other topics.
And you can find me on Twitter at Sean Merwin, or on the forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com, where you can talk to Teos and I about your thoughts on the show and so on. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter at MasteringDND. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production. Hey, Teos, what should we do now?
Oh, let's negotiate with some Nothics.
Yes, let's do that. Yep.